In the today's session, we are going to discuss the new point from herbs as a raw materials, that is identification, authentication, and processing of the herbal raw material. So let us move towards the various steps involved in the selection, identification, authentication, and processing of herbal raw material. Once we have grown fully the medicinal plant, it should be collected properly and it should be processed and supplied to the specific industry. So we should consider the various steps for the selection, identification, authentication, and the processing of the herbal raw material, like selection of herbal raw material, identification and authentication of herbal raw material, then cultivation of herbal raw material, collection of the herbs, and processing of herbal raw material. Let us move towards and we will see one by one the each step involved in the whole process. So very first step, that is known as the selection of herbal raw materials. So whatever the species or botanical variety is there, which is being selected for the cultivation, we have to supposed to consider the some authoritative books which are available in the country, or we have to supposed to consider the national documents or the national pharmacopoeia. If the specific herbal material it is not available or it is not given in these authoritative books or national compendiums or the national pharmacopoeia, we have to supposed to refer the authoritative books or the national pharmacopoeia of the other countries. If furthermore these things are not available, the pharmacopoeia of own country and pharmacopoeias of the other countries or the authoritative books, we have to suppose to forward the sample of the specific herbal material to the National Herbarium Center, and it should be recorded, and furthermore it should be utilized for the further scientific research. So in short, whatever the species of or the botanical variety selected for the cultivation should be the same as that of specified in the national pharmacopoeia or recommended by the other authoritative national documents of the end user country. In absence of such national documents, the selection of species or botanical varieties specified in the pharmacopoeia or other authoritative documents of other countries should be considered. This is the second thing. And third thing, if the whatever the plant is there, it is newly introduced, then species or botanical variety selected for cultivation should be identified and documented as a source material used or described in the traditional medicine of the original country, right? So in this way, it is possible to select the herbal material for the further cultivation. There are 4 techniques are there which are widely used to select the herbal raw material. Very first technique, that is known as the randomized selection. Second technique, that is known as the zoopharmacognosy. Third methodology, it is known as the chemosystemic approach. And fourth technology or the method, that is known as the ethnopharmacology. So very first one, randomized selection. So what is mean by the randomized selection? Suppose that we have visited the forest and there are so many plants of the amlas are available. So from that, we have to suppose to select the any one plant randomly for further processing or collection or the cultivation. It should be considered as the randomized selection method. So that is known as the randomized selection. That is plant material selected randomly from the forest for discovery of the new medicine. There are let us move towards the next method, that is known as the zoopharmacognosy. In the zoopharmacognosy, it is being done by observing animal behavior for the discovery and development of new drugs. Here, the observational study is carried out related with the animals, and whatever the information is there, it is utilized for the further selection of herbal materials. Take an example of a chimpanzee in the African forest lead to discovery of anti-malarial properties of Trichilia rubescens leaves. And one more approach is there, that is the ecological approach, which includes the production of certain secondary metabolites by plants for insect repellents. So that is related with the zoo pharmacognosy. Here we are considering the animal behavior. We are observing the animals for further discovery of the herbal medicine. For example, chimpanzees in the African forest leads to discovery of anti-malarial properties of Trichilia rubescens leaves. So let us move towards the next method, that is known as the chemosystemic approach, so known as the phylogenetic or chemotaxonomic approach. Here we are considering the taxa of the particular medicinal plant. Suppose the amla, it is from some taxa, right? So from the same taxa, some other medicinal plants are also there. If amla contains a vitamin C, it seems to be other taxonomical medicinal plant contains vitamin C, that is being considered as a chemosystemic approach. So this is one of the approach which is used for selection of the herbal material. It is also known as phylogenetic or chemotaxonomic approach. The plant belongs to certain taxa, is therapeutically active, then there is high chance that other plants belonging to same taxa can be active. For example, Imblica officinalis, it is belonging to family Euphorbiaceae and it comprises the ascorbic acid, gallic acid, and the tannins. Then the next method, that is known as the ethnopharmacology. So what is mean by the ethnopharmacology? Maybe all of you have learned the concept of the pharmacology. Maybe you are aware about the traditional medicine, isn't it? Traditionally, we are using certain medicinal plants or medicinal plants for the treatment and cure of the certain disease. And that particular information, it is being utilized for the further research, isn't it? That seems to be considered under the ethnopharmacology. So ethnopharmacology observes the knowledge of people, their traditions and beliefs for discovery and the development of new herbal material. Ethnobotany involves the study of certain plants with respect to ethnic group of people. In this way, the herbal raw material is selected, that is by randomized selection, zoo pharmacognosy, chemosystemic approach, and the ethnopharmacology. Let us move towards identification and authentication of herbal material. Okay, fine. Whatever the botanical variety is there, whatever the herbal material is there, it needs to be identified, it needs to be verified, it needs to be authenticated. What are the different processes which are involved in it for the identification of the specific herbal material? If you can see, there are various methodologies are available with us for the identification of herbal raw material, such as the macroscopic characteristics, microscopic characteristics, chromatographic procedures, and chemical reactions. Maybe in the microscopic characteristics, we are considering the surface properties of the material. Take example of acacia. For example, fractures which are present on the acacia or the color of acacia, right? That is being considered under the macroscopic characteristics of the particular herbal material. Then microscopic characteristics, for example, Venn islet number, salicylate ratio related with the maybe senna leaves, belladonna leaves, vasaka leaves, it should be considered. That could be helpful to us to identify the specific variety of the herbal material. Then the chromatographic procedure. Yes, we have the so many chromatographic techniques with us. Say, for example, HPLC, GC, and so on. These techniques might be utilized for the identification of herbal raw material. Furthermore, the chemical reactions. We have performed the preliminary phytochemical screening of some of the herbal raw material. For example, neem. So that could be helpful. These are related with a certain chemical reactions in order to identify the alkaloids, glycosides, tannins, flavonoids, and so on, which are present in the particular herbal raw material. So these are the some of the ways by which it is possible to identify the herbal raw material, such as macroscopic characteristics of the herbal material, microscopic characteristics of the herbal raw material, then chromatographic procedures, and the chemical reactions, or we can say it as a chemical tests which are to be performed related with the herbal raw material. Furthermore, it is possible to identify the raw material by using the botanical identity. Whatever the species, subspecies, genus, variety of the plant for the cultivation we are using, it should be verified from a qualified botanist or the institute, and it should be recorded. Suppose that we have searched, say, the new variety of medicinal plant. Okay, whatever the things are there, we have to suppose to send it to the botanist or the institute which are doing certain research on the herbal raw material, its identification and authentication, and we should get the report, and whatever things are there, it should be recorded, and that should be considered for the as a identity of the particular herbal raw material. Then the specimens. In case of new plant with a medicinal property whose identity is not known, suppose that whatever the plant is there, it is absolutely new, and we don't have any identity or authentication. It is not possible in nearby place. In such cases, specimen of plant should be submitted to National Herbarium for identification and the documentation. If fully new plant is there, we don't know its genus, species, and all those things. In such cases, we have to suppose to send the sample to the National Herbarium Center for further identification and authentication. Furthermore, whatever sample is there, it should be kept properly, isn't it? And furthermore, whatever the information is there or whatever plant is there, it should be utilized for the new discovery. When we are using the seeds from the market, and there needs to consider certain points that are related with the seeds and other propagation materials. It is being supplied by certain suppliers, certain industries, isn't it? And we are getting the bags of seeds, isn't it? Am I right? So the suppliers of seeds and other propagation material should be specify all the necessary information relating to identity, quality, as well as their breeding history. Furthermore, the seeds and propagation material should be free from contamination and the diseases in order to promote the healthy plant growth. So whatever seeds we are getting it from the market, whatever the supplied bag is there, it should have the certain information related with its identity, related with its quality, and related with the its breeding history. Furthermore, whatever the seeds are there, they are free from the contaminants, isn't it? So as to we will get the healthy growth of plant. So let us move towards the further identification and authentication of the herbal raw material. As you know, there are various evaluation tests are there. Again, this is the elaboration of the first slide. So if you can see the evaluation method, like a taxonomic evaluation methods are there, which could be utilized for the identification and authentication of the herbal raw material. Furthermore, herbarium voucher sample, then the macroscopic evaluation, microscopic evaluation, physicochemical methods, then chromatographic, spectroscopic, molecular markers, and immunoassay. So these are the certain evaluation methods are there, which are furthermore utilized for the identification and authentication of the herbal raw material. Furthermore, the identification is going to be done with the help of macroscopy, as already we have discussed, microscopy, phytochemistry, and DNA fingerprinting. So let us move towards the further details of the macroscopy, microscopy, phytochemistry, and the DNA fingerprinting. How it will help us to identify and authenticate the herbal raw material. So in the case of macroscopy technique, it involves the checking of external appearance, for example, colophony, for example, pale catechu, For example, acacia. So whatever the external appearance is there, it is observed under the microscope, and that will help us to identify and authenticate the specific herbal raw material. The arrangement of leaves on the stem and the branching, it is called as the phyllotaxy, and that could be one of the macroscopic characteristic for the certain plants like a senna, belladonna, vasaka, and so on. So this is about the macroscopy. The second one, that is a microscopy. As you know that there are so many parameters are there which are being considered under the microscopy. Say for example, powder characteristics are there, presence of starch, presence of crystal, presence of stomata, presence of trichome, and so on. Apart from these, the Venn islet number and stomata index, it could be utilized for furthermore identification and authentication of the medicinal plant which are present in the leaves. Take example of Indian senna and Alexandrian senna, that is Cassia angustifolia and Cassia acutifolia. So if we want to distinguish the Indian senna and Alexandrian senna, we have to suppose to compare the Venn islet number and the stomatal index, and that could give us the identity for the particular senna plant. So in the case of Indian senna, the Venn islet number is 19.5 to 22.5, whereas in the case of Alexandrian senna, the Venn islet number is 25 to 29.5. If we are determining the Venn islet number, it is possible to identify whether the given sample is Indian senna or whether it is the Alexandrian senna. In the same way, by considering the stomatal index, the Indian senna shows the stomatal index between 17 to 20, whereas the Alexandrian senna shows the stomatal index of 11.4 to 13.3. So this is a way by which it is possible to identify and authenticate the herbal raw material by using the microscopic techniques. Then the phytochemistry. As you know that there are so many preliminary phytochemical screening methods are there, and which help us to reveal the chemical constituents which are present in the medicinal plant or the herbal material. The analytical techniques which are used to identify the marker compounds, for example, UV, mass, NMR, HPLC, and the HPTLC. So these things should be considered under the phytochemistry. And the last one, that is a DNA fingerprinting. So DNA fingerprinting, it is a biotechnological tool. Here we are utilizing the molecular markers. So molecular markers like RAPD and RFLP. So molecular markers, that is RAPD stands for the random amplified polymorphic DNA, and RFLP stands for the restricted fragment length polymorphism. So molecular markers are the sequence of DNA which is unique to each plant, and that could be utilized for furthermore identification and authentication of the herbal raw material. It is useful in a condition like when small part of plant without flower is available. Suppose that we have a sample, we don't have the full sample of plant, only certain leaves and all those things are available. In these cases, it is possible to utilize the molecular markers. So more recent technologies are also available like a genomics, proteomics, and the transcriptomics. So in this way, it is possible to identify and authenticate the herbal raw material. So let us move towards the cultivation of medicinal plants. Yes, definitely we need to consider once we have selected, once we have identified, once we have authenticated the herbal raw material, the next stage or next step is the cultivation of medicinal plants. So cultivation of medicinal plants requires intensive care and management, as various factors needs to be considered, such as the environment, soil, irrigation, pests, and so on, which are going to play the important role in the cultivation of medicinal plant. I have here shown the image of cultivation of stevia, which is having a sweet properties, or which is used as a sweetener in the various food products or the pharmaceutical products. For the cultivation, we need to consider the certain reported documented method, which are scientific one. If the scientific documented methods for cultivations are not available, we have to suppose to utilize the traditional method. It should be furthermore optimized in order to get the maximum yield. If no data is available, traditional method should be adopted and a systemic method should be developed through the research. So in this way, it is possible to go for the cultivation of medicinal plant. There are few factors are there which are going to affect the cultivation or needs to be considered, like environmental factors, then soil, irrigation, pest, fertilizers, then water source, and so on. So this is about the cultivation of medicinal plants. This session, we have discussed the selection of herbal raw material. Then thereafter, we have seen the identification, authentication of the herbal raw material. And the last point which we have discussed, that is the cultivation of the medicinal raw material or herbal raw material.